as we get into this data, you will see the people are struggling to show ROI. They're struggling to prove the worth of the event. So when it comes to stakeholder alignment, what do you think are like the top 3 things that event marketers need to do to get that alignment?
Okay, so let's first of all talk about this concept of ROI. So it's something that we've obviously used for a very long time in both business and events. And it's actually something that I think is really out of date because, to my original point, we don't go to trade shows necessarily for lead generation or to make sales on site anymore. And in fact, sales cycles can be 18, 24 months long.
Yeah.
So how do you attribute that trade show presence to that sales cycle? It's really hard. So what we've got to do is we've got to start shifting, first of all, our own mindsets and then the mindsets of our stakeholders to really look at ROO, so return on objectives, because this is key. So many people, and Matt, I'm sure you see it in your day-to-day, they're attending a trade show because they want to maintain a competitive edge, or they want to do some brand campaign, or they want to launch a new product and put it out to market live at this event. None of that is related to revenue generation. And so it gets forgotten, but that's an absolutely critical part of any, not only event strategy, but a marketing strategy. It's critical to business. So what we need to do is, what I would recommend is any trade show manager or exhibit leader on this call, before you do any trade show at all, first of all, really flesh out the reasons why you're doing it, set out your objectives really clearly. And then when you're at the event itself, start to grade yourself on these objectives, because some of them are much more easy to measure than others. So you might say, okay, I'm going to do it based on how many conversations I have with current clients so that we can start to upsell. Great. You can add a score against that. Some of them might be, we want to have more social media coverage, or we want to find partners, or we want to recruit at this event. If you set your objectives up beforehand, what you can do is then retrospectively look back and say, did we meet those objectives? And that takes something intangible and makes it tangible, especially if you're using a scoring system. We'd recommend the Maxby tool scoring system, of course, which is one of our platforms. But the key thing really is to be able to assign a score to that objective and then present that back to the business and say, here's where we met ROO, here's where we didn't meet ROO, this is what we're going to do about it. So that's really the first thing, is kind of trying to shift your own mindset, the mindset of your team, and then the mindset of your leadership. But the other thing that we need to be better at is actually just communicating this. So we sometimes forget that our C-suite, our stakeholders, our senior leadership are not event professionals. They don't believe in that warm, fuzzy feeling that we get when we're on site. And I'm sure you've seen it loads, Matt, and everyone on the call has probably seen it. When you're at an event and you just know it's good. Do you know what I mean? That buzz.
Yep. Yeah.
They don't get, because they don't work in events and they don't love it like we do. So what we need to do is, again, you set your objectives beforehand, you then measure and track those objectives, but also the thing you've got to do beforehand is work out internally, who am I presenting this back to afterwards? What language do they speak? How do they like to consume this information? You may have someone in your leadership who just wants the headlines. Great. Give them the headlines. You may have someone in your team, for example, a CFO, who likes to see each granular detail. Make sure you have that as well. Is there someone in your leadership who likes to have face-to-face meetings? Is that how they consume content more effectively? Make sure you book in a face-to-face meeting with them. Is it somebody who prefers virtual, quick and snappy? Make sure you've considered all the ways that your leadership and stakeholders like to be communicated to, like to consume information. Have a plan for how you're going to deliver that. We like to compare it a bit to a buffet. So you've got a big buffet on and loads of different options. And what you want to do is prepare a feedback buffet for your stakeholders and say, right, which dish am I going to give which person? And you need to plan this before you even step foot on that trade show floor, because then you're making sure that you are armed with all the intel and information you need to strategically execute not only your exhibit, but that communication piece afterwards. And that's critical moving forwards. That was a really long answer to quite a short question, Matt. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. No, it's good. I think both answers were great. One thing I'd like to add in there is, like, man, you kind of sometimes have to be the person to flip or change the mindset at your organization, right? You have to be the one to go to leadership. And to Chloe's point, what she said was, like, some of these executives and stakeholders, they're not event people, but they are business people. So you, as an event person, you have to become more of a business person. You have to think like a CMO. You have to think in the way of saying, why, how, when, like, why are we here? What are we doing? Like, if I'm going to a CMO, I'm saying, what do you want from this? Like, what's going to make you look good? What's going to help the business? What would they're like, oh, you know, and if you get someone, it's like, oh, we always go, oh, it's always this way. Say, no. Tell me, what would you want? What would be the best possible outcome? Right. And start driving conversation that way. Cause now you're getting stakeholder buy-in. You're just going back like they're the client. Say, hey, I heard you. Here's some ideas that I have. We've never done this stuff before.
And it's also about being consistent. So you need to ask those questions every time, not just one and done. You need to year on year start developing that methodology around comparing your year and your trend analysis. And you need to get them in the habit of telling you realistically what they expect from this. Because once the first few times it might be difficult, it'll be like pulling teeth. I don't know if you have that expression in the US, but once your stakeholders get used to, good. Okay. So once your stakeholders get used to divulging this information and cracking these objectives with you beforehand, a couple of years it'll start to become second nature. And then you'll not remember. You'll think back and think, oh God, remember when we went to trade show just because we've always been, wasn't that funny? You want to move away from that part of the cycle, which is, I think, where we're at right now.
Yeah, it is where we're at. And I think a lot of event people get caught up in the planning. They get caught up in the logistics. They get caught up in the hustle bustle of everything that has to happen to make it come to life. And what they forget is there is a whole strategic approach planning that goes into it. Some people are just, they don't have the support around them. They don't have the help, but you got to find a way to talk to stakeholders and say, hey, we can keep doing it this way. We're not going to get a ton of results. And then asking those questions and trying to push in the right direction, essentially.
And I think we also need to look at it the other way. There may be some trade shows that we attend that we don't think, as trade show managers or exhibit leaders, we don't think they're working, but we go because senior leadership want us to be there. And actually, it's a case of let's stop spending our budget here. Let's either consolidate or redistribute budgets elsewhere or get an extra member of the team in, because that's really where we need it. Or we're doing really well at that trade show. Why don't we invest more there and start to put more of a focus on that, because that is hitting our objectives better. And I think we're also getting into the mindset at the moment of understanding we're not making ourselves more vulnerable by eliminating the events that don't work for our business. If anything, we're giving ourselves more strategic power. So don't be scared to say this event just isn't working for us. And that's okay.
Move the budget.
We don't need to go.
Move it
somewhere else.
Your leadership would love, the leadership would love you if an event person walked in and said, hey, this event sucks and nothing good happens, but I have this idea, or, hey, take the budget back, go put it into whatever, something else.